The International Monetary Fund expects global growth to slow down further next year.
And the IMF warns the worst has yet to come. And for many people, 2023 may feel like a recession. In its World Economic Outlook, the IMF downgraded its global growth forecast for 2023 to 2.7%, while its world growth forecast for this year remains unchanged at 3.2%. The IMF attributes the expected slower growth next year to the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, spiraling cost of living, and economic downturns.
The global economy continues to face steep challenges shaped by three powerful forces: the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the cost of living crisis caused by persistent and broadening inflation pressures, and the slowdown in China. The 2023 slowdown will be broad-based, with countries accounting for a third of the global economy expected to contract this year or next. In short, the worst is yet to come, and for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession.
To share his insights about the IMF's latest projections, we have with us Economist and Pamantasan ng Lungsod na Maynila President Emmanuel Leyco. He's joining us live via Zoom. Good evening, Professor Leyco. Welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening, Robbie, and good evening, Gretchen. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for being here. I mean, there's no other way to put it. IMF, it just all sounds very grim. What does all of that mean for Filipinos?
Well, the IMF proclamation, or the IMF declaration is nothing exactly new because we've been hearing this from other economists and we've been hearing this from other institutions. Most recently, before the IMF made this declaration, the JP Morgan president himself said that it's not a question of whether or not it's going to happen, but it's a question of when. And I think what the IMF declaration made today is just very clear. It is coming. And for us in the Philippines, like what IMF mentioned, it would look like a recession for the three big countries or big economies. But for countries, developing countries like the Philippines, it's going to feel a lot worse. And the scenario that we are looking at would be joblessness and contraction of our economy and perhaps bankruptcies among some major companies and households.
Yeah, and what will be the impact for two key pillars for our country? OFW remittances on the one hand, BPOs on the other. You mentioned the top three markets expecting a slowdown. That includes the United States, the entire of Europe, and China.
The U.S. is a major source of remittances, where many of our Filipino brothers and sisters are sending their remittances from. And if the U.S., and as we have been seeing right now, experience this kind of economic difficulties, our remittances will also suffer. But even if they don't, the recession in the U.S. and continuing inflation in the Philippines will already make us feel the pinch because the continuing increase in prices will make the dollar remittances even more, they say that the remittances will benefit from the appreciation of the dollar, but it's temporary because dollars getting stronger, the peso getting weaker, the recession will weaken the purchasing power of our economies.
Given the grim forecast in the international market, any bright spots that you see, and how do we transition our labor markets and prepare for the worst that is to come?
Well, I'm not sure we can do much except that I think we have to hold back on some of our budget or some of our spending. But I'm looking more like the Philippine budget should be reoriented towards a defensive mode, assuming that the recession comes and Philippine economy suffers, there will be a lot of joblessness, and therefore the Filipino community, the Filipino people will need a lot of help from our government. So the budget that we are talking about now in Congress, I think should be positioned towards enabling our economy or our Philippine government to be able to come to the rescue of our Filipino communities.
Sir, just to clarify, on the one hand, you said that what the IMF said, none of this is new. On the other hand, just now you're saying we need to reorient the budget given what the IMF is projecting. Does that mean that this new projection is not yet factored into the budget for 2023?
Well, given what we've been hearing about spending of the government and not exactly being sensitive to deficit spending, we are borrowing, we continue to borrow, and I think we have to look into essential items in our budget. For example, I don't think there is a need for the Department of Education, for example, to have a huge budget for intelligence. This is an education institution, so why would you need so much? And I think we also have to look at some of our infrastructure spending. Some of the infrastructure items perhaps can be deferred or even abandoned, and look at the social requirements that we might need in 2023.
Well, just as they say, there's an opportunity in every crisis. Are there any opportunities that you see that Filipinos can now shift their gaze upon or take a look at?
I think this is a wake-up call. We've been importing almost all our requirements. All our food requirements are being sourced from outside. And as the Philippine peso weakens, the food supply in the Philippines is getting more challenging. And I think this is also what's pushing inflation higher. The more we are unable to produce for ourselves internally, we source them out from outside. The more that we use dollars to pay for our requirements, I think that is what is pushing our inflation. That the more dependence that we have, I think, is the major culprit in our weakening economy.
Bilang panghuli lang po, ano pong masasabi po ninyo doon sa statement ni Sandro Marcos saying that the peso is not weak but the dollar is strong?
I think that is a wrong statement, if not a incomplete appreciation of what is happening. The Philippine peso is weakening because our economy is weak and so vulnerable. And it's not just a question of the dollar strengthening, which is true. The dollar is strong, but having a weak economy and a weak peso does not help.
Alright, maraming salamat po, PLM President Emmanuel Leyco.